All right, I have a topic that I think is just, I don't know, it's fascinating to me, something that I'm really focused on in 2026, which is non-QM, right? Non-qualified mortgages. And I think that there's definitely a segment of the mortgage market who is really up to speed on non-QM. And we see a lot of loan officers that are benefiting and growing their business because of their understanding and aptitude around these products and programs. And I think a lot of people are missing the boat right now as far as non-QM. And you ask a lot of loan officers, what non-QM options are available, or what percentage of your pipeline is non-QM right now. And some people aren't even tapping into that market. So that's for loan officers to get educated on. But I want to get your take on a few things. First of all, just non-QM in general. I know we call it non-QM because we had the QM rule, and these are loans that are outside of the QM rule. They still have ATR requirements, ability to repay, but they don't meet the qualified mortgage kind of exemption. But it feels a lot like this is very similar to how we started the run up to the last meltdown, if I'm being honest with you, right? It started with kind of like, these alt A products. We got into subprime products. All these things were kind of alternative to agency or conventional standard government financing. I mean, it kind of feels like the same thing all over again, but now we have ATR involved. So I don't know. What is your take on the non-QM market? Do you see it continuing to grow? And by grow, I don't just mean as far as the percentage of market share, but as far as the diversity of product that's available in the non-QM space. Do you see the appetite growing by institutional investors and Wall Street eventually and whatnot? Just your overall take on kind of where non-QM's at today, where it's going, and are we just starting another ascent into craziness as far as high risk mortgage products go?
Yeah, I'll try to give you a short answer. I think from my standpoint, like being in the capital markets world, when you think of product, there's thinking of the borrower and then there's thinking of the investor. So spending an entire career in capital markets, I think about from the investor standpoint, it's an asset they're investing in. And then, oh, by the way, I hope there are borrowers that actually fit it, and it's bringing the two together. So when I think non-QM, obviously you mentioned kind of the shades of, prior to the financial crisis. I do think ATR is probably one of the most important features that make non-QM very different than what happened pre-crisis. But from an investment standpoint, there is a ton of demand for this product. Now, it's not that investors want non-QM. They're not going out saying, I want to buy non-QM. What they're looking for is, I want a certain yield and a certain performance. And non-QM really meets both of those things. And what that means is they want higher yield. When you buy MBSs, you don't get great yield. Now you get great credit because it's guaranteed by the government, Fannie, Freddie, Ginnie, whatever, GSE controlled. But you also get liquidity, which means you have mortgage-backed securities that are very transportable. They can be traded on, open exchanges. It's very different than non-QM, where you have to buy them in whole loan form. And because you're buying in whole loan form, you get more yield. So the investor is getting more yield. It's good credit. It passes ATR. It's usually lower LTV, higher FICO. You just have to get used to that. There's a story behind the income documentation or something about the loan, why it doesn't meet agency or government guidelines. And so a lot of times they'll just call it a story pool or a story loan because you have to tell the story behind it, but there's a lot of yield there with good credit. And so I see a lot of investors want yield. Think about for yourself for a second. Let's say you bought an agency MBS and it's earning a 5% yield. Well, let's say the Fed lowers rates tomorrow. Every single one of those borrowers could refinance, right? And so this asset that you bought could completely pay off. Well, the story behind non-QM is it's harder for them to qualify. There aren't as many options for them as far as lenders. There's not streamlined programs for them where they can, refi, rapidly and for multiple times. And so there's just less options. And so they don't refi or pay off as quickly. So this asset you bought is likely to last longer. And so you get the higher yield and for potentially a longer period of time.
Oh yeah, that does make a lot of sense. So So if a loan officer is thinking like, hey, I don't want to put my time into learning this product because I've seen little windows of time over even the last few years where this market kind of shrank up like really quick. The market got nervous for whatever reason, something was going on, and, non-QM kind of dried up for a minute. Do you think there's a risk of that happening again? It sounds like maybe not. It sounds like there's a pretty high demand for this type of an investment vehicle, so what are your thoughts on this? Is this something that's here for the long run, and should loan officers spend the time to get educated on these products?
I think liquidity, to address that part of it, liquidity is a waterfall. Like treasuries are probably the most liquid. MBS would be behind that. Whole loans would be behind that. Deep distressed credit would be much further behind that. So if you have a liquidity event where maybe treasuries aren't necessarily trading as well, like that's going to waterfall down. If MBSs aren't trading as well, that's going to waterfall down. So there's always the risk of non-QM, of liquidity temporarily being disrupted. COVID was, an example. That was a very extreme example. If there's a credit crisis, that would be a more extreme example. But aside from that, there's been a very constant supply of demand outside of credit events or major liquidity scenarios like we had with COVID.
Okay.